10 years in a row.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I think for me now, where I think what changes for me is my focus level. Like when you get older, you know that your focus
Absolutely.
level
You're running out
changes.
of time. You got to get shit done.
Right. You value money a little bit better.
A
You
lot
value
better.
your time a little bit better.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. For sure.
yeah, man. So what I have going is I'm working with a company called Social X, and they're a social media platform where they just basically go out and just put social media content everywhere. Their job is to just get content, put it everywhere. They asked me to do a series for athletes. So I just been interviewing a bunch of athletes. I grew up in New York, so I grew up playing basketball and football. So I interviewed just everybody that I know from that realm. But I thought this would be different because I really admire what you do. I've noticed, like I've watched you come up through the ranks. Come up to New York, training at Bev Francis. I saw like when you started, at least from when things started coming on the internet and through muscle magazines and stuff like that.
Right.
But I guess just talk about your journey real quick, man. I don't want to steal the thunder on that.
Okay. Are we recording?
Yeah, we on. But I'm gonna dub it, however. So don't worry about that.
Okay. So as far as bodybuilding is concerned, I got into it late in the game. I believe I was about 28 years old when I even thought about doing my first contest. I had always been a gym rat, and in about 2003 or so, I went to a competition for a guy who was actually the owner of a gym I used to attend. And I saw the competition, and I was like, wow, this is something I really would like to give a try. He encouraged me to try it. So I started training, and my first competition was in mid-2004. I believe I dieted for about 10 weeks for that show.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was was it the Bevs or was it it was the Mets, which is now called
Brooklyn Mets, yeah.
Metropolitan.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that show, which was mid-2004. I did well as a novice. I placed second place in the Open. And then I did the Eastern USA the following year, light heavyweight. I won the Eastern. I won the whole show that year. 2005, I was slated to do nationals, but I wanted to take a year off to improve. So 2006, I was getting ready for nationals. Then I had some issues pop up at work where it made it impossible for me to do any competition. So now after 2006, I wasn't back on stage until 2008. 2008. Now I did the inaugural, I believe, or maybe the second year for the show. It was the Brooklyn Grand Prix, which is Matt's. What's Matt's last name? I forgot Matt's last name. Forgive me.
Promoter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Promoter. So I did Matt's show in 2008. Won that show. Did nationals in 2009. Placed top 5, 5th place in nationals in my weight class. Behind Seth Feroce won on his pro card that year.
Yep.
Seth Feroce, Tamir El-Gindi was in that weight class. It was a tough class that year.
That was one of the toughest national shows I've ever seen.
That's when Cedric won the overall that year. He turned pro at that show. Jeff Long got his pro card, and Jeff Long got his pro card as a heavyweight that year.
Mm-hmm.
That class produced a lot of good competitors and a lot of good athletes. So now, let's fast forward to 2010. I was thinking, 2010, do I want to do nationals again? Someone said, hey, why don't you try to Team U? Because at this time, I'm competing drug-free around this time. So someone's doing well in these national shows, and you're doing this all drug-free. Why don't you just try the Team U? If you win the whole show, you get your pro card.
Yeah.
So I thought, all right, I'll give that a shot. So I put all my energy in 2010 into doing the Team U, which I did. I actually won the Team U. Got my pro card. I didn't want to accept the pro card that year because I wanted to delay it because I wanted to go compete at Worlds, because the winner of the Team U, back then at least, you win it, you get to represent the United States at the World Champions of Bodybuilder.
Okay,
that's an amateur show. And this show was supposed to be in Qatar that year. So I was going to get a chance to travel, compete.
Yeah.
under international field of some of the best amateurs in the world to see how I kind of stacked up against. And I was really excited.
Right.
And they're saying that they're going to cancel the show due to concerns about terrorism that year.
Mm.
So I just ended up accepting my pro card in 2010. And I said, you know what, I'm going to try to do a couple of shows in the 202 weight class, the new weight class for the IFBB 202, not 212, 202.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So 2010, no, it's 2011. I did 2 pro shows, and I won my first 2 shows that I did as a pro.
New York Pro and Toronto Pro?
Jacksonville. I did the Jacksonville. It was a Dexter Jackson Classic in Jacksonville, Florida, and then the North Carolina Muscle Heat. They called it the North Carolina Muscle Heat, and I won both those shows.
Okay, those are 2 pro shows?
Those are 2 pro shows.
Oh,
my very first 2 pro shows in 2011. After winning my first 2 pro shows, I got a seat at the Olympia. So I went and I did the Olympia in the 202 weight class. That's the Flex Lewis won that year. I got 11th place that year. It was my rookie year there, so I said, you know what? I wanted to bring top 10, came within the place of bringing top 10 in my first Olympia, and I was happy. Things changed for me. I was able to compete in the open class the following year. Now we're talking New York Pro, talking Toronto Pro.
Yeah.
Top 6. So 2012, I did 6th place in New York, and I did 4th place in Toronto the following year.
What was your weight coming to those shows that year? You remember?
202 on the button.
Oh, you stayed at 202.
Yeah.
You still did the open?
No. For the open, no. My stage was 222.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had a rebound, and I was able to do a little bit more things, bodybuilding, still within the confines of my current employers.
Mm-hmm. I get it.
Everybody needs to know that, like, I can't play around with a bunch of different things.
Absolutely.
So, I had to make sure whatever it is that I was able to do was within the confines of not only the law, but NYPD policy, which is tight as hell when it comes to certain things.
I can imagine.
So, so I was able to still put on a good amount of stage weight while being tested as a police officer still, and, being randomly drug tested, scrutinized, and all of that stuff. And I managed to come in and I probably should have been lighter. I think I played the weight gain part a little too heavy. I probably should have been about 6 pounds lighter. So I think.
Let me ask you, around this time, because Fakri is a good friend of mine. When did you hire him? Around that time?
Right after nationals in 2009.
Okay. So you worked with him all the way through.
Yeah. So what happens? I had a couple of coaches from local gyms, and including a mentor of mine in 2009 for nationals. Who he himself is he's now a retired police officer, retired as the rank of deputy inspector. And he guided me to my top 5 place in the nationals. He was good friends with Fakri, so he introduced me to Fakri, and Fakri kind of took over the reins of my coaching from 2010 until 2012.
Okay, how was that experience?
It was eye-opening because Fakri is old school mentality in terms of bodybuilding, and I think that's what helped me put on a good deal amount of stage weight, because he pushed I didn't understand the extent to which you need to push food and cardio at the same time to keep yourself lean and off season. So it, like, me rebounding, basically to make the 202 weight class, I really had to restrict my diet all year round.
Yeah. So
you're talking about me about 2 years in a row of basically restricting your diet to, I was somewhere below maintenance calories for 2 years in a row, just to stay light enough to do 202. And I just thought, hey, that's the lifestyle. You want to look good all year round. That's what you have to do. And then I got with Fakri, and he bumped my calories way up, and my body just exploded.
Do you remember where your calories were roughly?
I had diets where I could tell you what my macros were. I was in the 400 calorie range for my daily macros. I was in about 500 grams a day carbs. So let's see, that's 400. That's 2,000 grams that's 2,000 calories from protein. Another 2,500. We're talking about I was taking in close to 6,000 calories a day. It was a tremendous amount of food.
Yeah. So
And then
what I find what I always found pretty interesting about your physique is and you were just kind of talking about this, and you and I, just because we know when we understand this, you could look at guys when they walk on stage and say he's using a lot. You know what I
yes,
mean? And for you, I always admired because you could look at you could see the small joints, you could see the tight muscle bellies, you could see just the symmetry that you were able to maintain at that level. How do you feel that you were still able to maintain your look, placing in these shows, winning shows against these guys that are clearly overusing and giants? What do you feel that your niche was with that?
that actually it gave me a lot of confidence, knowing that what, if I ever decide to go that route, and to be honest with you, I was never really going to go that route fully because bodybuilding was always a hobby for me. I placed my police career of a bodybuilder, so I
Yeah,
didn't do anything to jeopardize my police career to the extent of taking the amounts and different variations of substances that would endanger that career in order to bodybuild. But I was like, you know what? If I'm able to stay within the confines of police guidelines, the law, and place well in these shows, and still have a on stage, because I was probably never impressive. If you saw me in the gym or whatever, like, hey, that guy works out, he looks good, but it just translated well on stage.
yeah,
That's what counts. And that translation got me good placings, and I was confident that I was going to be able to continue to make small progressive steps every time I competed to keep me in that top group of people competing. I was confident that as long as I stepped on stage as an IFBB pro for as long as I wanted to, I could place top 10 in a top tier show. In a second tier show, I was confident I was going to be able to place top 5.
mm,
And between a second tier and third tier show, I was confident, depending on who showed up any given day, that I could win one of those shows.
yeah,
Competing in Olympia every year. But at that point, I kind of got burnt out on bodybuilding, and I decided to, put that on the back burner and
yeah.
just on the sport. So
Yeah, it's a good segue, man, because what I most admire about you, because there's a lot of bodybuilders and there's a lot of great bodybuilders, but what I most admire about you is you are still able to maintain your career, as an officer. And you are, correct me if I'm wrong with this, part of the anti-crime unit in Brooklyn.
I was at the time. Right
Yeah.
now, I'm actually a detective, and I'm currently assigned to Staten Island, where I do investigations for all the precincts in Staten Island overnight. I'm what they call night watch, like, or not the Night's Watch from Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
called Night Watch. When everyone else is sleeping and they need a detective to come out on a scene, they call us. We go out and we investigate all manners of crimes.
Wow. Okay. Now, what do you feel like your biggest challenge with your current position?
Um, well, basically today, just the environment of being not only an officer but being a black officer, that
Mm.
holds its own unique challenges.
Why is that?
Well, okay. When you become a police officer, you get kind of inculcated into police culture. A lot of guys, when they join this job, they take the identity of being a police officer and they so merge it with their own identity that they are unable to extricate the problems associated with policing in America from themselves. So they take these things personally. If
Yeah.
someone criticizes the police as an institution, they look at it as being having them personally and their way of life criticized, to the point where they have a knee-jerk personal reaction to these sort of criticisms, whether they
Mm.
be exaggerated or exactly on point. So
Okay.
that's one thing I've learned to not adapt, or over time, over the years, I've learned to separate myself as a person from the profession as a whole. So that's one set of issues I've had to learn to deal with. And then because of the problematic nature of policing, which some people who are cops won't even acknowledge exists, I've been put at odds with some of the things that I've seen, some of the things that lead to a disparate impact on persons of color within the department, as well as you being an officer of color. You see yourself often put in situations where the system of discipline or the system of self-correction kind of comes down on you harder. Like, maybe you won't get a position you want because somebody else has a hook, and that hook might be because of a A, race, B, nepotism, C, other factors beyond your control, but there's always that little background music of race playing. And
Yeah.
the more conscious you are of that, the more you're able to recognize it, not just to blame it, but to say, okay, that's part of the reason.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just move on. But like I said, when you're a police officer, a conscious police officer of color, you see things, especially if you're educated in a lot of these things. You see patterns, you see widespread patterns and smaller patterns that affect you as a person and as a cop on a daily basis, and that creates some friction sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, right now, our country is, there's some sensitive times right now. There's a lot of tension, with respect to the Minneapolis situation. Then you have the situation in Atlanta. I think last I checked, African American males were killed by officers at, I think, like 4 times the rate than any other.
I think it was like 2.5 times the rate.
Is it 2.5? What do you feel contributes to that?
Okay, so some of the best training I've ever had on this job, non-physical training, was this anti-bias training. It was given by 2 retired police officers. One was a state trooper in Arizona, and one was a retired police captain from Virginia. 2 white dudes. Now, I'm sitting there feeling insulted in the class, like, you got me, a man of color.
Yeah.
I'm a conscious brother. I'm very well educated and versed on racism, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You have these 2 white guys teach me about racism. So I'm sitting there with the side eye, lean back in my chair, and they started speaking. And let me tell you something. They broke down this topic, and I went to Brooklyn College. I'm college educated. I've yet to see a very concise, comprehensive breakdown of police bias when it comes to how individuals in the police department interact with persons of color.
Yeah.
So bias, it doesn't mean you're prejudiced. It doesn't mean you're racist. We all have our own inherent biases.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those biases are informed by facts and other things that may not be factual, by rumors, by our experience as we see from our perspective. And so policing, when you send someone who's not necessarily attuned or familiar with a certain culture or a certain group of people, and you send them into these communities to police them, they're bringing not only the biases they have from media, from music, from their own personal experiences with persons of color, but also from the things that they see on a daily basis. And as a police officer, you're not always seeing the best, the brightest, and the most functional persons of color, because who are you interacting with on a normal daily basis as a police officer?
Right.
So a lot of those biases now have an impact on how people see persons of color, especially Black men, as a threat. And how do you deal with the threat? I'm gonna pull out a Star Wars quote. Master Yoda says, a lot of anger. So now, where does this anger come from? This anger comes from confusion. So anger leads to fear. Fear leads to hatred. Hatred leads to suffering. So now, if you're angry or fearful about something you perceive a person of color, a Black person, a Mexican person, whomever may do to you, then as a police officer in charge, who has to be in charge of a situation, you might tend to go harder based upon your perception of that individual, and that becomes institutionalized.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we can get into the days of the slave patrols and how the formation of modern American policing, and we could debate whether that's the full story of American policing. I tend to think that it's not. There are other factors that people who conveniently want you to believe that narrative leave out in terms of policing worldwide and in America. Let's gloss over that. Let's just get to the point where bias that forms in a police officer who may not be prejudiced or racist, their actions result in a prejudicial or a racist outcome for the person who they're interacting with. And therefore, you fulfill the institutional level of policing by your actions as a biased individual. So long story, that's what I believe.
I think that's, number one, that's the best explanation that I've ever heard. And, I call this Perspective Podcast because for me, it's a treat for me to do this because it's all about gaining perspective. We all think we know everything until we actually speak to people that's actually involved in these things, and then they start breaking it down. So I think that's the best explanation that I've got. Now, with all that being said, in your humble opinion, what do you feel the fix is?
Wow. Some people, some of the more extreme voices out there that we need to dispel with the institution of policing in America altogether. I think in the beginning, if you try to do such a thing, what's going to happen is you're going to impact the most vulnerable populations, and the most vulnerable populations in America tend to be the poor communities, which are almost always minorities. So if you get rid of police, there is the small group of people among those minority communities who are going to take advantage of that vacuum, and they are going to create a unstable, lawless, reckless community for people who are trapped in there. Now,
Right.
so you can't just knock down that one domino, because the other dominoes that are going to fall are going to be dominoes of businesses in the community, churches, innocent people coming to and from not being able to live safely in the community. So the fix to me needs to be a combination of kind of rethink things. What do you have the police respond to when people call 911? There are a lot of things that I don't believe. The situation in Atlanta, for example, I believe that should have been a response of paramedics who would have come on scene, evaluated that guy to see if he was sick, if he was simply just drunk, and he tried to drive away. At that point, I believe they could have called the police like, hey, this guy's drunk, it's drunk driving, that's a crime. Passed out behind the wheel of a car by itself. I just think we need to re-envision how much authority, not authority, but how much of the burden of kind of correcting society we are putting on the backs of police officers, who we are now telling, with their own inherent biases under the structure of institutional and structural racism, to go out and kind of police areas for things that don't necessarily need policing. So just kind of, I think mine is a softer approach, not just getting rid of police departments, but hey, we don't always need the police to go here. Maybe we should have this sort of response unit, a mental health response unit. Maybe we need to have this sort of team or whatever respond to this first. And if the situation deems that we need a police response, we can always call the police. So I think we just need a little bit more of a hands-off approach. You know, I mean, listen, that says nothing of when you really need police to go into a situation, because you know what? When someone gets kidnapped, you're not calling a social worker. When someone gets raped and there's a crime committed, when there's a burglar in someone's house, when there's a drug cartel or a drug gang operating, or there's a human trafficking ring operating, you need police there, because that thing needs to be corrected ASAP. But the millions of calls American police get to respond to things on a daily basis, we need to filter that a lot better. So maybe the interactions on a daily basis doesn't have to always be so conflicting in nature to kind of drive some of these statistics. I think we could cut a lot of these statistics if we're a little bit more judicious in the way we use the police as a tool to correct society.
So I know what the numbers tell us. The numbers tell us that minority urban communities are policed more. Do you feel that that's in fact the case?
It's in fact the case because of a couple of different things. Because if you are going to kind of deploy your policing resources based upon numbers of where crime happens, then it'll be disingenuous of anyone to say that number isn't going to be higher in communities of color. And that is quite often the case because of other facts. See, now, they see policing as the solution to this problem, but that problem on a lot of different spectrums is rooted in
poverty,
the educational system, a lot of different socioeconomic factors, a lot of factors of personal accountability that is lacking on the smallest level, including in the home and in the person's own existence. So there's a lot of different factors which lend itself towards crime, but they kind of don't throw resources at it in to kind of address these different factors. They just throw the police at it because the results of it is crime. And you can demonstrate that by showing crime numbers on a CompStat spreadsheet or something of that nature. Here, this is where the crime is. Okay, and I always wondered why police commanders and police leaders always said, hey, I know this is where the crime is, but all I could do is arrest people. This is going to keep happening because the causes behind it have not changed.
Right.
What are you politicians, what are you civic leaders doing to address some of this? Because if you keep throwing us at the problem and we keep having these negative interactions with these communities, but you're not solving all of these other problems that's causing the crime, that doesn't, we're a hammer. All we see are nails.
Right.
You know, what else are you doing to fix things?
Right. Yeah, that's this is a blessing for me, and yeah, it's what you said. I think it's poverty, education, lack of education, lack of funding, in these communities, and you're asking you guys to come in and put band-aids on every situation, and that's
Exactly.
really
And
tough
you
to
see
have.
how that turns out. You know, that never turns out well on a widespread basis. And I think it's also unfair to the individual police officers and police agencies who gets tasked with that. It's not fair that you have to go fix all of society's problems.
Right.
And it's not fair to you as a, and I don't see why also police officers as individuals aren't considered victims of the systems as well, because they're just cogs in the wheel, just like the victims are. You know, you're a stormtrooper in the Empire. Whether you think you are a Jedi restoring order and peace and
Yeah.
tranquility, or if you think you're a stormtrooper, I like to use Star Wars analogies. I'm a big Star Wars fan.
Believe it or not, I just watched the first Star Wars the first time like a month ago.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
There's 8 more. Keep going. Not to even speak of all the books. But back to my point, you're putting the institution of policing in a no-win situation where
Yeah.
more aggressive they seek to police. In America, the way things are built, socioeconomics, et cetera, the people that are going to end up policing the most aggressively, because part of policing as well is to keep and maintain social order, and the lower spectrum of the social order, because of these socioeconomic factors, are generally going to be people of color or people not economically well off, and those are going to be the ones where the police, with their collective hammers, have to nail down the hardest. And
Yeah.
as a result of that, you're going to see these inequities. So now, don't just address policing. Some of these socioeconomic factors need to be addressed, and that will result in less of a need for aggressive policing as well. But no one wants to have that conversation because it's not sexy, it's not
Yeah.
hashtaggy, it's not trending.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like just politicians are just punting the ball. It's just
Yeah,
that's all it seems like.
you can blame the police now. It's dangerous to assign a certain level of personal responsibility for people in their own conduct now, because we have a movement where persons of color can only be seen as victims in society right now. So to speak of persons of color in any other light besides a victim of these forms of racism is taboo. And for you to bring it up, you may be branded all sorts of sellouts, all sorts of coons, Uncle Toms, or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, if you even imply that there is a certain level of personal responsibility which may mitigate your exposure to some of this stuff. Right now, the chic thing to do by a lot of our super liberal friends is to kind of have persons of color believe that you can only be a victim of the system, and there's no way to kind of be victorious in the face of the system unless you acknowledge your victimhood, and only through then can you achieve some sort of redemption, which
Right.
I find completely ridiculous. But that's
Absolutely.
probably an hour-long podcast we could dive into.
Yeah. No, I find it ridiculous because with that logic, we never will get to the root of the issues. By never taking any personal accountability, we never will figure out what needs to change. And if you're always blaming, externalizing the issues out, I don't think there's a way to fix that.
That's correct. You have to take extreme ownership of your personal life and of your communities and any institutions you belong to. For example, the police department. I think it's incumbent upon all police officers to hold the institution, if they profess any love for policing, to the highest standard possible. So, hey, what do you expect this guy to do? He had to use that. No. You should always hold yourself and as something you are part of to the highest standards possible. So when someone does I'm just gonna say, when someone does some fuckery out there, don't support that guy. You can hate the sin. You can hate the sin and love the sinner. It's okay to kind of come down and Monday morning quarterback and say we need to do better as an institution, as individual police officers, and not be anti-cops. So I get a lot of that as well. I get flack from a lot of people when I criticize police officers, the institution of policing, saying I'm not pro-cop. No, if I was in pro-cop, I would let things go as is without trying to correct it and make it the best that it could be.
Yeah, that reminds me of the whole thing of like not challenging, even like the American flag, the whole thing with Colin Kaepernick. It's like the most American thing you can do is challenge your country to be better. If you're just standing in front of a blue shield without challenging those institutions, that's not being a cop.
Right, like how that's basically the birth of a nation. Let's talk about Crispus Attucks, a great Black American patriot who died when they stood up to the British soldiers. You
Right.
know, the Boston Massacre. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about those. You criticize the powers that controlled you, and you criticize the Boston Tea Party. You know, the American Revolution. All of these things were people who believed that they better was owed to them by their rulers, and they stood up for it. They framed the Constitution because they believed that the ideal that would guide America should be higher than individuality.
Yeah.
Individuals had rights, but who was going to guarantee our rights? We need a set of laws and a framework that's as perfect as possible to do that. And although this country has not lived up to its promise, the ideals it set forth for itself. Those ideals are still there, and we're able to grasp those ideals
Mm-hmm.
as a country if we start on a personal level, taking responsibility within the framework of things that we can. And I don't hear enough of that being spoken during this time and during these movements for police officers or citizens
Right.
taking ownership of
Your
their
point.
stuff and moving
Mhm.
forward, trying to improve it. So
Yeah, most definitely. How has your job changed since the recent events? Has it changed much at all for you?
Okay, so we recently got an email in regards to the new New York State and New York City City Council um, use of force rules. So NYPD for over 20 years has banned chokeholds. Chokeholds were always banned. We could never deploy a chokehold to gain control over a subject.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Recently, there has been guidelines put forth, laws set forth that says you cannot sit upon, lay upon, or kneel upon an individual's body.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a direct knee-jerk reaction from former officer Derek Chauvin, a murderer, kneeling on George Floyd's neck for 8
Mm-hmm.
minutes and 46 seconds until George Floyd passed away.
Yeah.
Um, However, I am a jiu-jitsu practitioner. Um, a lot of moves in jiu-jitsu, which I have done to me personally by people well over 300 pounds, and I'm still here today, in controlling a human body is from the mount position, when you're literally sitting on top of their hips and their stomach area, and now you're trying to gain control of an arm, or if the person's rolled over on their stomach and they're hiding their arms, if you kind of straddle and you sit on their butt, and now you can try to get an arm out from underneath and place
Mm-hmm.
cuffs. They have banned basically us using our body weights, or our knees to kind of gain control over a person's body
Yeah.
and then maneuver a person's limb into a pair of handcuffs. Right now, as it stands, we can only wrestle with limbs and try to control limbs to get a person into custody. And failing to do so, even accidentally, you can't even throw a headlock on. So now I'm not talking about chokehold. We've all wrestled around with each other. A headlock.
Yeah.
You can't even deploy a headlock now to control an individual. So that being said, and we have not been given guidance as how to actually control a person, are we are now struggling to find out, okay, well, if I try to grab an arm and they get away from my arm and I can't take them down, kind of get on top of them and kind of try to throw them in a Kimura lock, an Americana lock, or any kind of arm bar to secure a pair of handcuffs. And if I do so accidentally or intentionally, I am now liable to be sued as an individual. The city is going to be sued. The police department is going to be sued, and I'm going to be, even if it was an accident, arrested. So if you and I start struggling and we fall to the ground and I fall on top of you and I'm on top of you for any appreciable amount of time while trying to control you, I am now subject to arrest. I don't know if people understand how arresting someone who doesn't want to go to jail works.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're even people who have kids. Imagine what you have to do to your kids basically to get them their flu shot or something like that. Like how you have to kind of wrestle your kid. Imagine 6'2", 300-pound guy who just raped somebody. Turn around, put your hands behind your back. No, go fuck yourself. If I grab his arm and he pulls his arm away from me, I have to let this rapist go because
Yeah.
if I fall on top of him, I'm going to be arrested. So, I think this is an overreaction. So policing has changed as far as physically now what we could do, and this is just recently. Moreover, I believe it's changed mentally for people because if you were inclined to believe that you can do whatever you want to people, you had that kind of mindset that you were here to you were some sort of modern day safari guy. You're out in the wilds in a safari, and you have to tame the savage wilds and all this
Mm-hmm.
with whatever force. You were authorized to do so by this badge. I think that idea is quickly being dispelled, and it needed to be dispelled a long time ago. You're a servant of the people. You know what? You are authorized to use force, and God forbid you are authorized to take someone's life if need be. But it has
Right.
to be an extreme need for that. And so a lot of people who are considering uses of force are kind of coming to the light of day where they're like, well, I probably can't do that anymore. No, you probably shouldn't have been in the first place. And you definitely can't now, because more and more, not only is the public not falling for that shit, individual officers now who kind of see situations playing out where, hey, listen, I'm not even going to sit here and watch you do that to someone anymore, because now I'm going to go to jail. So I think people are becoming more aware of that. Cops are becoming more aware, and we're kind of policing each other more, which is something that is long overdue, if you ask me.
Holding each other accountable, yeah. Do you
Yeah.
feel like the situation in Atlanta, do you feel like that was two officers that just couldn't figure out how to detain this dude the right way? Or do you feel like those things came in their mind, like in the heat of that battle?
Yeah, it's never an either or situation. I think it's always a situation of where various factors in various ratios always come into play, and it's like putting ingredients into a cake or into a pie. It's not always this and that. It's this, and that, and how much of this was the factor, how much of that was the factor,
Yeah.
and here's the result: a fucked up cake. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, part of it was those two officers were dealing with a guy who obviously was able to outmaneuver them physically, overpower them physically. They didn't have the proper tools in terms of physical training or physical strength in order to restrain this guy appropriately. He got the better of them. He had more of an impetus to get away because of his, I think, a condition of his parole or whatever. And maybe there was a little bit of fear and intimidation factor for him. Like maybe was not his first time dealing with the police.
Yeah.
He want to go back to jail, and he had his own biases in regards to the criminal justice system, how he would be treated. And now these cops see this guy fighting, and they have no idea why he's fighting so hard. Like, oh my God, now he represents a threat to me. Here goes the black threat theory playing out. Here goes his own physical actions playing out against them in real time. Their adrenaline starting to pick up, and bad decisions get made. Is that a result of a systemic issue, or is it a result of personal accountability issue at that given moment? Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, it's a cake. All of these ingredients got put into the situation, and
Right.
that's how that played out. So I think it's a little bit of all of that. My issue was the whole taser thing. Now that's a legal issue that's going to have to play itself out in the courts. The Atlanta DA said a taser was considered deadly physical force when the police did deploy a taser against someone, and now they're saying it isn't. So once the law has to be fair no matter who it's being applied to. And is shooting a taser, if somebody shot a taser at me, would I fire back with my firearm? This is one of those few situations where I can say that I don't like to Monday morning quarterback, but if that taser didn't make contact with me, I don't think that's going to justify me, especially the guys running away.
So I'll play the one side on this for a second. Just reading the law, I've become a fan of the code and law. So in Atlanta, it says that, especially for an officer, if they feel that there is a clear and an imminent danger to themselves, someone else,
right,
that they can use deadly force. Now, the gentleman was running away, had his back turned until he turned around with that taser.
Right.
So I feel like the DA in Atlanta is going to have a very tough case to make, because that officer could say, well, I feel that my life or somebody else's life was in danger because he deployed a weapon at me.
Okay, so now here's where politics comes into play. He's in the re-election mode. He scored political points from having these officers fired and arrested. Quite often is the case when it becomes so political, and one of these politicians, district attorneys, are elected officials.
Yeah.
Sheriffs sometimes are elected officials. When they can fire or discipline a police officer to their political benefit, they will do so, knowing that in the court system, it's like you're setting up. It's like the WWE. You know what the outcome is going to be. You know the law. The case law doesn't, and the statute doesn't support this charge.
Right.
You're charge him, you're going to give the people their bread and circuses.
Yep.
Ultimately, this person is going to walk.
Be disappointed.
And now when the public is disappointed, what's going to happen? For your own personal political gain, upon completion of this trial, you're facing a potential riot protest situation because people are going to be dissatisfied with the system.
Yep.
So, this has played itself out before, and that's what's
playing
itself out now.
And I thought she overreacted. She was already calling for charges way before they even did an investigation on it.
I mean, that's part of this situation as well. I don't think, clearly, I think there was a little bit more of a malicious intent with Derek Chauvin than there is with the cops, although the results were the same. You can't always say, hey, someone died, and so this is the reason. You have to look at it on an individual basis. I don't think anyone in America, whether they wear a uniform or not, will disagree that Derek Chauvin is a piece of shit murderer that needs every bit of justice he has coming to him. But let's not say all situations, because George Floyd, to me, I didn't see him resistant to the point where any of that force should have been used. But you could justify a higher degree of force to be used against
Brooks.
What's it?
Brooks in Atlanta.
Yeah, I could. You could agree for
Sean Brooks.
The level of his of the amount that he resisted and fought with the officers, you would justify a higher level of force being used against him. So unfortunately, he died from that, and that's the last thing any cop wants to do. My God, that's been a nightmare for me from now to the day I retire, to ever have to put myself in a position where I take someone from this earth because I'm in fear of my own life. I've been in similar situations, and I've never had to, but I mean, I don't think those officers had the intention during the start of this incident to do so. They spoke to him respectfully in the first place, so it's tough. And I think that decision in Atlanta was definitely politically motivated, and that's not going to end up serving the people well when this thing is all said and done.
Not at all. And what I noticed too, Vaughn, is so you police and you work in New York City.
Yeah.
So, and New York City has over 8 million people, and there's a lot of poverty just like any other city. But in comparison, New York City's crime rate is low. What do you think contributes to that?
Okay, so I think we have a lot of public resources, more so here being dedicated to education. There's a lot, of social programs out here, a lot of social programs. We have domestic violence shelters, we have charter schools, we have community resource centers. There's a lot of social programs out here, and not only that, but a robust economy. A rising tide lifts all boats. So we have a robust economy that, in terms of the legit one, and a lot of street vendors, a lot of people able to hustle and make a living on a daily basis out here. So I think a lot of these factors tend to be the things that drive crime down. But also, we are a CompStat city. So a lot of our crime statistics are kind of, not going to say fudged. I'm going to say you can manipulate a spreadsheet to say anything you want it to say, right? So a lot of our crime statistics come from our CompStat reporting that the New York City Police Department puts out there. And when the political impetus from the mayor or the powers that be is to ensure that crime stays down and keeps being driven down every year, that filters down to the police department. So now when crimes are reported and crimes are being placed in their respective categories, there's going to be a little bit of creativity used to make sure that those things tend to trend downwards. And that's going to be crimes where there's not necessarily any concrete proof that it happened, such as a murder or rape. You can't hide a murder or rape, but you could hide a burglary by saying it was a criminal mischief. Oh, someone's door is broken, and oh, by the way, a petty larceny, something in the house went missing. No, that's a burglary. But it could be classified as two lesser crimes rather than a higher crime. So I'm not saying that's the sole reason why crime is being driven down. But once again, that is an ingredient in the cake as well as the other ingredients that I mentioned, and many more. So that's that whole combination is part of what keeps the crime in New York City in check right now, and kind of at bay. And we're seeing some of those things go away, and it's going in a really concerning direction right now. But
I always sometimes I'll get into these discussions with people, they instantly start when they talk about black on black crime or urban poverty and crime rates. they like to bring up Chicago. And those who are educated and educate themselves understand the makeup of Chicago. When you consider
Right.
square footage, you consider the fact that they're surrounded by other cities that have zero to no gun control laws.
Exactly.
And if you break up Chicago within the square footage and you look at the per capita rate, the crime rate is actually lower.
Right.
What do you think is different between New York City and them?
Okay. Like you said, they are surrounded. Chicago is an unfortunate oasis that's surrounded by lax gun laws. Similar for New York City. I mean, we're on the receiving end of the gun pipeline going up to I-95, and we get a lot of guns in here. The difference is we have a robust police force, and some of the investigations. I'm trying to get a guy on my podcast. He's an NYPD officer. He was on the boxing team. He's a first grade detective, and he used to be an undercover. And this guy was responsible for undercover buys of thousands of illegal handguns off the streets.
In New York?
In New York City, dealing with gangs, cartels, dealing with all sorts of shady criminal elements. And that's just one detective. And we have joint task force that works with the ATF and the state police and the New Jersey and police in New Jersey and Connecticut. So, there's a lot of good, solid police work, honestly, that has resulted in stopping a lot of this stuff before it happens. And some of it as well is with the gang units. They say, okay, this gang database is racist. It's part of it's a problematic part of the criminal justice system where your name gets put in the database, whether you're associated with a gang or not, and you're marked, given this kind of scarlet letter that you're a gang member and it affects you in negative ways. A lot of that intel, a lot of targeted police, and once again, when I was in the anti-crime unit, you do your homework, you get on people's social media feeds, you can see, literally, they will plot a crime on social media, and if you do it savvy enough where you can kind of hide your identity, that they don't even know that you could like put up a profile of a picture with like you're like a hot chick or something, like they will expose their criminal activity to you, and you're able to target the right people, or should I say the wrong people doing crimes. And so a lot of police work has become more and more inventive and precise and precision oriented instead of just this whole stop and frisk everybody in the world. We target crime effectively, and we're able to put our resources, all of this budget money that they're trying to take away from us, all that budget money goes directly into a lot of these practices that target crime and target the people actually doing crime instead of like messing with innocent people who have nothing to do with it. So that has helped. Once again, everybody will say it's only a small population of people that drive the majority of the crime, right? So now if we're more able to effectively isolate and target that small population of people, do you see how that results in us in driving down crime to a larger extent than other cities who don't have this capability?
Right. No, definitely. And I think that's interesting to hear that, because I assume that same type of approach to policing and try to protect your cities aren't used in every city. You mentioned about taking away police resources. What I noticed is, and I read an article a couple of days ago, Camden police, they disarmed their police force, right?
Really?
Camden. And I think the article I read said their crime in Camden itself went down 40% after they did that.
Went down 40%.
Went down.
Arming the police.
Once they just, and this is going on 6 years now.
Wow.
Now, obviously, New York is a unique place. There's nothing like Camden. How do you feel like that, by doing that, will affect other cities?
Well, you have to take it city by city. It's kind of like with this COVID situation. What's going to work in Camden is not necessarily going to work in New York. And what's going to work in New York might not necessarily work in Los Angeles or San Francisco.
Right.
So if it's an experiment you would like to conduct where you have a unit that is not armed and you can kind of do an experiment in certain precincts, in certain areas that more reflect the demographics, the social economics of Camden, if that's something the police department is willing to try, then I think that's something that's it's up to that individual department to try. And when you get more data that says, hey, this works and we can deploy this in other communities, then it's incumbent upon the department to do so. If that's something they feel like, I never fall subject to theory that you should just discount something straight off the bat.
Yeah.
There are ways you can experiment. There are ways you can try things to kind of see if that will be successful. But once again, in the scientific community, once you come up with a scientific discovery, you have to show the steps you took to get that discovery, and another scientist has to be able to do your steps and replicate the same thing. Then they can verify your discovery.
Right,
So,
right.
once again, take Camden's formula, apply it in a similar situation here or in any part of the country, and if Camden's formula worked, eureka, we found it. So let's replicate that wherever we can, you know?
Yeah, but it has to be based in a lot of intellectualism, proof of fact, that kind of stuff. I absolutely get that.
And not be a political thing, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Reaction, disarm the police. Yeah, well, you know what? You can't disarm the police in Brownsville or East New York. I'm sorry, we're just not there yet, you know,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Vaughn, how long have you been on the force?
What's today's date? 28th?
Yeah, June 28th. Yep.
So 19 years and 28 days.
Wow.
Who's counting?
What I find most amazing is
no, sorry, 18 years. 18 years. I hit my 19th year on July 2nd.
Oh, okay. All right.
I got a year left till I'm eligible for retirement.
Nice. That's awesome. What I find amazing about that is because this is a high pressure job. I'm sure I don't have to tell everybody that. And you were able to maintain this job and clearly, moving up the ranks and become an IFBB pro. Like how? Because I work with clients and stuff like that, and I get people that use the craziest excuses to not make wellness, a focal point of their lifestyle. Mm-hmm. How are you able to do what you do? Because even now you're not necessarily competing at the IFBB realm, but I see you run your business. You train. You still train hard. How are you still able to maintain that and do what you do?
Well, especially lately. Well, in the beginning, I always kind of found it to be something of a hobby, of a passion, and I always wanted to be active, fit, and healthy for myself and for the job. And then I started falling in love with the process of health and nutrition and exercise. So that helps for you to have a passion for it.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, and you see this. This is a foreign language. This lifestyle is a foreign language for some people. They grow up speaking the language of sedentary lifestyle, ignorance in terms of dietary practices, not being exposed to positive, healthy, active households or communities or environments. And that kind of indoctrinates you in a lifestyle of unhealthy practices. Like I said, my mom was always active. She played netball. I'm from Grenada. I was born in Grenada. Here. My mom always played. I remember my mom being on the netball team. I remember my dad always swimming and being active and healthy when we were younger. We've always played vigorously while we were kids growing up in the 80s and 90s. And so being active was always a part of my life. And once I became ingrained in the exercise, diet, and bodybuilding culture, that kind of it settled in so in sync with everything that I knew before that it was a seamless transition. Now, my wife, you see on our Instagram page, she competes herself. She's been in the gym since she was 16 years old. She has her nutritional certificate. And so like you find people to surround yourself, people in your life who also have these same beliefs and apply these beliefs on a daily basis. And it just makes it so much easier. I take it for granted that not everyone has this sort of structure surrounding them.
Yeah.
And so like it's always been somewhat of a seamless thing for me to kind of just immerse myself in this healthy culture. And as a result, I was able to meld it perfectly with work and always make sure I take time to exercise and all this other stuff. I probably could, if I wasn't into this culture, I probably would have climbed the ranks in terms of becoming probably a higher supervisor or something on this job. But it was never my passion to climb the ranks of the NYPD power structure as much as it was my passion to make sure that I remained fit and vital, healthy and active.
Got a balance.
And so it balanced itself out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, man. That's why I wanted to do this with you, because I know a lot of bodybuilders. I know Jeff Long. I know a ton of guys, and that's not to take anything away from them. But when I said I want to do these interviews, I said I got to find niche guys. I got to find niche guys. Like when I started in bodybuilding, I always had a full-time job. I was always doing something. I could never understood the dude that just was a personal trainer and literally just bodybuilded. Like bodybuilding was the only thing that they had.
Right.
And I would always say, man, I don't know how you guys do that. That's not the life.
That's scarier than having a full-time job. And I mean, hey, I could always put bodybuilding on the back burner, but a lot of these guys, like if bodybuilding kind of didn't work out for them, it was like scary. I mean, Jeff Long right now, he's an entrepreneur, he's a businessman. Yeah. He had to put bodybuilding on the back burner. I remember him saying one day he was getting ready for a competition, and he's like, "What am I doing?" He was like, I got a house, I got a kid, I got a business. He was like, what am I stepping on stage for?"
Mm-hmm.
So like he kind of now is embracing the fact that, you know what, bodybuilding can be a hobby, can be something you always pursue, but if you don't develop the other aspects of your life, I don't think you'll feel as fulfilled with bodybuilding as you would think. And I know people right now who are regretting the decision to pursue bodybuilding to the detriment of other aspects of their life.
Yep. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
I see it all the time. It's not as big as it used to be back in the day. But
no, not anymore, man.
Yeah, but I see it's big time. Vaughn, what else would you like to, what would you like to end with? Talk a little bit about just your business. I see you taking clients.
Yeah, so a passion of mine is, especially as a first responder, as a police officer, and taking a look around the landscape of my fellow officers and seeing a lot of them not being in the best shape that they could be in a profession that demands so much of you physically, and that you give so much of yourself physically too. And ended up seeing guys retire and die in 5. The average lifespan for a retired NYPD officer is 5 years.
Wow. Wow.
And you can retire at a very young age on this job. You can retire in your 40s, and guys are dying in their mid-40s. This job will, the stress factor, the lack of sleep, the stuff that you see, it'll take a lot out of you. And I spent the last 17, 18, 19 years seeing people not being in the best shape they could be. And coming from a bodybuilding background, I said, hey, you know what? I kind of want to get into coaching, but I don't necessarily want to coach competitors. Maybe I should do a niche within a niche and just offer first responders a chance to kind of revision the way they think of themselves, the way they fuel themselves, health, wellness, being active and being healthy, and hopefully help you in your work performance as well as your family life and living a long, healthy, fruitful life after you retire. So that's kind of what my wife and I, we kind of started off with a couple of clients and then a couple more. I mean, we don't have a ton of clients. At any given time, I don't think I ever carry more than 20 clients. And it's because I still work a full-time job. But this is definitely something I plan on pursuing full-time once I retire and being able to help a lot more people, knowing the pitfalls, knowing what kind of issues you may face as a first responder and police officer. So, it's kind of a passion of ours. And we're going to start delving a little bit into the financial aspect of it. Also, I see the way a lot of cops a lot of first responders manage their money and how reckless they are and how a lot of guys end up in financial problems. And it's almost the same principle. You have to balance your calories and balance your money. Both of it.
It's all one.
So that's something else we plan on branching out. My wife, by education, she's actually about to complete her accounting certificate, but she has her master's in accounting and finance, and she worked in the financial industry for many years before she moved from Canada to the U.S. So she has a very strong background in that, and that's something we plan on pursuing as well. But the fitness part of it is just there's no doubt about it. If you're not a fit first responder, you're a detriment to yourself and to the community you serve. So I kind of wanted to address that right away.
So your business is mostly targeted towards first responders from the consulting.
We take on clients of all employments, but I definitely promote myself more towards first responders because, I mean, when you need help and you're the person who people call to help them, and you yourself are not in good shape, that doesn't instill a lot of confidence in the person. Or I can imagine yourself, at the end of the day.
Right, so, most definitely. Yeah. No, you're definitely right about that, man. And that's I think that's great. And I personally never heard of anyone else doing that.
Yeah, that's why we say this is it's a niche within the niche. do this the right way, not only will we be able to be successful ourselves in this, which is starting to grow. I mean, hey, listen, I have patience because I still work my full-time job as a cop. So I have as long as I'm doing that, I have patience and time to grow this business slowly in the right way. But we felt like if we attack this and we could also inspire other people to kind of maybe take on that niche as well, it could only help the first responder community.
Definitely.
More than enough first responders to go around. I don't claim to have a lock on this niche at all. If anybody wants to jump in, if they want to see how I do it, I'll be more than happy to help them, because my primary goal is to get first responders fit, active, and ready to serve the people we signed up to serve.
Yeah.